everybody for coming today. My name is JP LaCour. I am chair of the Conscious Capitalism chapter of New York. And it means a lot to have people come. This is a volunteer operation. And so to have people take time out of their busy schedules and come, I really appreciate it. Just real quick, by show of hands, how many people have been to a Conscious Capitalism event before? Okay, so we got a lot of new people. That's great. And that means a lot to us too, because this is a movement that we're trying to grow. If you aren't familiar with it, it started as a book by John Mackey, who is obviously founder of Whole Foods, and the philosophy is all about how do we make capitalism healthier. We live in a world today where we have tremendous problems, and we also have a lack of trust in institutions. We don't trust the media anymore. We don't trust government. We don't trust, in some cases, big business. We don't trust higher education even. And yet, we need business to be part of the solution to the world's problems. And so, the idea behind conscious capitalism is that capitalism needs to evolve to become part of the solution and less part of the problem. Historically, it's been a great motivating and human organizing force. It's pulled billions of people out of poverty. It's also done so at some costs around things like sustainability, wealth, disparity, those kinds of ideas. So the idea behind conscious capitalism is that there are sort of four tenets for businesses to follow and for capitalism to become healthy and to sort of evolve. The first is that businesses have to have a higher purpose beyond just making money. There has to be a reason that they exist beyond profit. Pursuing that reason is what, and serving the customers is what creates the profit. The second is that they have a conscious leadership structure. And the third is a conscious culture, that the people there and the leaders exist to support that purpose, that higher purpose, and to drive that business forward, not to enrich themselves personally. And the fourth is to have a multi-stakeholder perspective. That businesses need to make their strategic decisions with an eye towards all of their stakeholders, not just their stockholders or their investors. And a couple weeks ago, we saw the Business Roundtable finally kind of embrace that philosophy that we can't just exist as businesses to support the largest capitalist entities. Can't exist just to support the stockholder. That there has to be a broader concern. And there is probably no more strategic decision a business will make than some kind of an M&A transaction. And most of us have lived through M&A transactions, or looked or seen them from the outside or from the inside, and we know how disruptive they can be. And so we convened this discussion tonight in this panel because we wanted to begin to expose the M&A community and that part of the capitalist system to this idea of conscious capitalism, which has not historically looked at it. So that's sort of the idea behind it, the purpose behind tonight, and so we hope you guys enjoy it and learn something. We also want to thank folks at Primary and Tim for hosting us here. They've been a great partner for us over the last couple of years. And if you check out consciouscapitalism.nyc, you'll see the upcoming events we have in the next few months as well. I encourage you guys to get involved. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Andrews, and I'd like to thank Mike from Hawkstone Capital for being kind of the organizing force behind this and really helping us to put together this panel, this event. We rely not only on the volunteers that are part of the board and the community, but also our partners who come in and do this event. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike. Why don't you introduce the panel and take it away?
My pleasure. Thanks, JP. Let me start by introducing our panel tonight. To my immediate left is Jay Roberts. Jay is current CEO of Cancer Genetics, Inc., a company historically focused on supporting cancer drug therapy development and patient care. Jay has been leading a transformational strategy of the business centered on M&A transactions and to reposition the business for growth. Jay has been a senior executive with several private equity and publicly traded healthcare technology and service companies, with 5 successful exits and the completion of over 50 transactions from both the buy and sell side perspective. Next to Jay on his left is Gavin Watson. Gavin is a member of the board of Conscious Capitalism for Connecticut and brings a unique perspective to the conversation, having recently sold his family-owned business, Watson Inc., in which there were 4 third-generation sibling owners. Watson Inc. is a food manufacturing company with 330 employees and $100 million in revenue. Watson Inc. has been in operation for over 80 years, and the business was just recently sold in March. Gavin's long practiced conscious capitalism principles at Watson and has had firsthand experience in what it's like to exit a conscious business. And then to Gavin's left is Bill Vogelgesang. Bill is co-founder of Epic Pie, an investment bank marrying business opportunity to like-minded capital in hopes of birthing a flourishing world. They use culture assessment tools, one of which you have on your chair, to assess, as an assessment tool to give their clients insights into culture, values alignment, and integration issues. So with that, let me direct the first question to Gavin. And Gavin, this is kind of a two-part question. First part of that is, how is the organization, your organization, Watson Inc., living out the principles of conscious capitalism before the transaction? And then tell us about your transactions from a high level and how you've been able to try and preserve those conscious capitalism principles.
Sure. So what we were trying to do, I'd say over the last 8 years or so. So I guess maybe just let me say I was a psychology and religious studies major in college. The things that get me excited are why, how people work and think and what motivates us and drives us and things like that. And also, why we're all here. What's the bigger purpose in life and what are we all doing? So one of the examples that I would give is that, everybody's sitting here, everybody's breathing, right? And it's extremely important that we're all breathing. But, if somebody stops breathing, that's going to be very important for that person, and the rest of us all going to go, to that right away and, see if we can help, right? So companies are like that. Companies have to make money, because if they don't, it's like stopping breathing. You go out of business, they're gone. But that's not why companies exist. Companies don't exist in order to make money. Companies, they have to make money. It's super critical. But they don't exist to make money. They exist to create working environments and opportunities for people to grow and develop and become better, become who they want to be. So, what we were doing was trying to create working environments where people had as much autonomy as possible, as much freedom to learn new things, to try new stuff, to go where their strengths, where their strengths are really good, so they can make valuable contributions to the team. That was the main driver, the main focus that we were doing. So that's how we kind of started off. We ended up getting involved in other things along the lines. My sister Moira is particularly interested in anything to do with helping people with food and nutrition and things like that. So we're a food company, so there's sort of a natural fit there. So we did a variety of things. We started we basically plowed up the front yard and planted a garden, created a garden, and we had 50 employees at the very first year, all out of 330 who signed up for a plot. So they got a plot, and maybe I don't know anything about growing stuff, and maybe Bill is an expert on something, and like, hey Bill, can you help me out or whatever, or maybe I work on the production floor, and somebody else works up in the analytical lab and stuff, and all of a sudden we've got adjoining garden plots and we're learning from each other and things like that. So we're creating kind of a really cool environment and thing going on there. Then my sister Moira, though, just relentless on pushing things as far as she can go. So so what we did was we plowed up even more the next year, and we created about 25% of it. We decided was going to be part of the garden for the local food pantry or for the Connecticut Food Bank. And on top of that, my sister got a local school for kids on the spectrum to come in, and they actually helped to tend that garden along with our employees, and then would take the produce and stuff and bring it down to the local food pantry and everything. So really kind of getting this whole community thing going on. And people are meeting each other and developing relationships, that never met before in the company. And so, that was just, an example of a thing that we did that just where we kind of pulled everything all together.
And how have you been able to try and hang on to those principles following the sale?
Yeah, so the garden and all that stuff is still there. Everybody's still doing all that stuff. For the most part, the culture and everything is pretty much the same. So one of the things we did initially was we were approached by a much larger company that had a smaller operation that was very similar to ours, and they were interested in acquiring us. So we all spent time talking to various people at this company, and every time we talked to somebody, they're like, wow, these people are really nice. And so there's definitely this sort of feeling that, yeah, okay, this is probably a good match and everything, but then I actually went and got on an airplane and flew out and actually interviewed people at some of their other production facilities and talked to them, talked to production managers, talked to some of the people on the production floor and stuff. Didn't know, of course, this is a publicly traded company that's interested in buying us, so nobody can, whatever, so I'm just, this guy who's just coming in and, whatever, and having conversations and, so that kind of thing. But it was really cool. They were doing a lot of the same things that we were doing. They just sort of started doing we had a appreciation board that we had up on the wall, and you could just basically it's just whiteboard, and you could just write a note, if somebody did you a favor or helped you out with something or whatever, or it was a compliments and accomplishments board. And they were doing a similar thing. They had an appreciation board, and they put little sticky notes and everything. They were a little more formal about it. They had different colored notes for different colored things, things like that. But it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, we can kind of see this. And we talked to some of the people. I talked to one of the business owners that they had acquired the previous 2 years previous, and who was still working there in the company, and asked him what it was like, and he said, yeah, they're really good. They just pretty much leave us alone. We have a good culture, and they're letting us keep doing it.
Jay, next question for you, and you come at this from a slightly different perspective. So, how would you define the stakeholders in some of your recent transactions, and how they had differing needs and expectations? And if you could wrap that into an example of a transaction that's happened recently.
Yeah, so in fact, we have a perfect example of the most recent transaction. So we are in the business of developing various diagnostic tests around cancer research. And so a part of our business supports large pharma and biotech companies that are developing innovative therapies to treat patients with cancer. And we had a part of our business prior to an exit that was focused on patient care. And in that part of the business, we were very focused on bringing diagnostic results forward to physicians that were caring for patients with various types of cancer, really across a very, very wide spectrum. And and as part of that effort, our founder, in fact, guy here at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Dr. Shigante, had a real mission around developing innovative technology and innovative therapies to support cancer. So he started the company, and he brought along many people from had some of his fellows and people that had trained with him over here into the lab, and sort of brought the lab along. Then we sort of migrated from what was a very much a founder-led company to what became a venture-backed company. And during that time, we had one of our venture capital investors join our board, became our chairman, and while had a great, a very good track record, also had a view in terms of how we wanted to see the company run and sort of the direction and pathway to take the business. And he, just as a sidebar, he happened to be an individual, if there's bankers in the room, who actually didn't like paying banker fees very much. And so while he wanted to get a lot of things accomplished, he wasn't terribly thrilled about the fact that we had to hire professional advisors around us, be it bankers or lawyers or whatever. And so just kind of plant that for a second as I think about, as how this chairman became a significant stakeholder in this equation, but was also a fairly large investor in the company. And then in 2013, the company went public, and so now we had all of these public shareholders. And then, we found ourselves in a position at about the time that I joined the company 2.5 years ago, where we were raising significant capital, we were burning significant capital, and we were diluting our shareholders significantly. And then we would sort of repeat the cycle. They'll raise more money, burn cash. And so, at some point, our board decided that, we couldn't continue. We didn't have a sustainable business model. And so it was really up to us to try to, change that dynamic. And so I entered the equation, and my experience was having done quite a number of transactions in my past. But I found myself faced with the sort of the ousted founder who was still on the board, not really engaged in the process, but somebody who deeply loved not only the company, but deeply loved the mission, deeply loved the fact that we were able to treat patients. He was a leading researcher and scientist, and that had been his life, work, and career. And then we had a venture capitalist on our board who had one thing in mind, and he was a large shareholder. And his view of the world was he cared deeply about shareholders and put that before anything and everything. And then, of course, along the way we had raised capital, other debt capital, so we had debt holders that were part of that equation, and of course they cared deeply about their debt in our company. And so we ran into this position where we knew that we had to transact the company, and we needed to do something in terms of finding a merger partner or some other partner. And as we sort of made our way through it, we recognized that that ultimately what we were really trying to accomplish was for number one, our customers, because as we evolved the business plan, our business became very, very focused on drug development and drug companies and biotech companies. And the work that we were doing became fairly significant because we had a very robust and a fairly broad portfolio of capabilities. And of course, we had 200 employees, and so we had great researchers, people that had come along with the company. It was really interesting as I kind of looked across the universe of our people. Many of those people were the people that had been with the company from the very beginning and rode it through very, very difficult and rocky times. And so to fast forward to the more recent time, we ended up in a situation where we had to walk away from a merger agreement that was inked and ready to go. And we walked away partly because we had the other partner who was really looking to basically change the dynamic of the transaction, wipe out our shareholders, wipe out our credit holders, didn't really care what impact that was going to have to our customers, wanted us to significantly reduce headcount, which obviously the restaurant was a business that makes sense, but at the same time, they really became they were really focused on the fact that we had this portfolio and nothing else really mattered. And we realized that the value of what we had was much greater, particularly if you think about the work that we were providing and the fact that we had very large pharmaceutical companies, the Mercks and the BMSs and the names, Pfizer's, all the names that you would recognize were customers of ours, and all customers saying, we don't like your balance sheet and we don't like kind of where the company is, but we love what you do, so get to a better place and we'll be here for you. And so we recognized that the customer was actually really important. So we had all these different people pushing us in multiple different directions. Ultimately, we got to a place where we found another partner, and we were able to get to a closing transaction. And the day before the closing, our venture board member didn't like the fact that there were bankers and lawyers that were going to have to get paid the next day, and so decided that for him, that was important, and so made certain decisions. And and so as we thought about what was really important, what we knew was that we needed to get the company to a safe place, which we did, and the benefit was everybody kept their jobs. We retained tremendous customer and customer loyalty, which is now starting to show great traction. We're continuing to sort of drive the business forward for the benefit of our shareholders, and we think that we've got a plan that's going to work really well in that regard. So we had to be able to really kind of focus on all these different multiple stakeholders, and everybody wanted a different answer, and somehow we had to try to find what was that right balance. And we think we're in a good spot.
But you're able to preserve the mission of the company, your clients, and the employees that have been with the company since the beginning.
Which was the key.
Thanks. Bill, next question for you. In the sale or merger, what can a seller do to protect the business from post-closing changes that might impair the mission or culture?
Everything they can. So, I think the essence of that is having a great argument for why those things are important. Are they a part of your brand? Is it explicit? Maybe they are a part of your brand, part of your value proposition, but they aren't explicit. In which case, I'd say you should take some time, take your team for an off-site, and make sure that those elements, whether it's culture or the mission, whatever it is in your mind, is so key to the business and needs to be retained. You need to have that, codified in some way. It needs to be explicit, and I think, you know, throughout the organization. So it needs to be sort of the way you sell, it needs to be, you know, a part of the business. And then the job is relatively easy, right? Because you go to the buyer and you say, you like this business, well then don't screw with that, because that's critical. Well, you like this business, don't screw with that either, because that's critical. And so at the end of the day, because unfortunately the world is not, we don't have as many impact investors and conscious investors as we need right now. We're at a place where we have to justify the business reason very explicitly, so that these financial stakeholders, most of whom really only, you know, I won't say only care, but they have to make enough money for their investors so they can raise another fund. And that's the game they play. And so that game has to continue for them. They're an important stakeholder. We just need to figure out how to bridge those worlds.
And I'll stay with you. Can you give an example of a transaction that you facilitated that was clearly influenced by that kind of higher purpose? Example you can give of?
Well, so sort of in the middle of recapitalizing $120 million compostable products company, so I won't share names. But it has obviously a real commitment to the environment. And it has a mission of essentially eliminating plastics. So they can tell you more than you ever want to know about the 5 gyres of the oceans and the plastics, one of which is the size of Texas, et cetera, et cetera. And those people are passionate about that. And so we did the typical, you know, little pitch deck, you know, here's the problem, this is the company's solution, and the majority shareholder rewrote the whole thing with the mission. You know, really didn't get to any of the business elements until the end, which, you know, in hindsight we're like, yeah, we should have done it. So in that case, his screen was, you know, this is our mission, and it's not changing, and we could potentially, for example, do this without disclosing. So their products are many times would, if you're Burger King, you might want to package their product with a plastic component, and they'll say, sorry, we won't do that. Now, there's just a lot of business people in the world say, you want to buy my product, it's yours, right? There's no conditions on how it's used. They have conditions on how it's used. Now, the interesting thing is, because of that, they have this leading brand, because that's part of the value, that's part of the brand, is this strong adherence to this mission. So, you know, each one is different, each company is different. That's obviously a company where the mission is clear. Other companies, it could be in the way they care for their employees. Earlier today, I just a little bit about my prior answer. You might take a look at the Container Store, and instead of core values, they have these sort of goofy little icons, and I think there are 9 or 10 of them. And when you go through those, you have a sense of what's important about that company and why it's important. And that's a great way of sort of boiling these esoteric, soft, fuzzy things into real concrete value.
Great, thank you. Gavin, I'll come back to you now. And you've kind of answered the first part of this question, which was, is cultural fit and leadership compatibility an important part of your transaction process? So pretty much I think we know the answer to that, but what was being planned in your transaction, so post-close, to ensure that cultural integration and effectiveness?
Yeah, so there wasn't anything that we, codified or wrote down or whatever like that. But we did have plenty of discussions with our upper management and about those things. And what we did was we looked at their past history. So the company that bought us is called Glambia, and Glambia Nutritionals is the part that we're part of now. And Glambia had actually bought about I think 12 or 14 other companies in the last dozen years or so, and every single one of them, they kept all the employees. They didn't fire anybody. They left them alone, let them do their culture thing, things like that. So so we felt pretty good that they had a really good track record, and they understood that track record was important because they are hoping to buy other companies like us in the future. And they're like the guy who's part of their acquisition team actually just said look, if we go and screw the whole thing up, then what's the chance we're going to get the next company that we want to buy, right? They're going to say, oh no, look at these guys, whatever. So they need that track record to be good, so that it keeps going.
And Jay, I'll ask you the same question.
So it's interesting because I think about culture in terms of, particularly in an M&A setting, where it isn't really meant to be one individual side of an equation. So you've got obviously two sides of a transaction. It's not that cultures really need to blend, and blending culture is because it's really about having people, and people matter, and it's really about how different people interact. And so as we've thought about, because we've done quite a few transactions over time, and I think that the big part of whether a transaction can be successful or not has not a lot to do with the structure of the transaction as much as to do with the integration post-acquisition or post-merger. And probably the highest order item on the integration list tends to be the culture. And I know that we've seen situations where people want to sort of superimpose their culture, whatever that means, on top of the other. And a lot of times it doesn't work. And what we found is what does work is to come into it with this open mind to say, we'll develop a new culture, and every time we do another transaction, the culture is going to change somewhat. And obviously it doesn't mean that you're going to change your core values, or you're going to change the way in which you see your leadership might think about the business. Those tend to be consistent, but it doesn't mean that you don't, that I think in all cases, you bring in new people, you bring in new thinking, you bring in new ideas, and it's that sort of extra sort of idea, generation that helps to recreate what the future of the culture is going to be. And so it's all about sort of the post-transaction time.
Post-transaction integration is always critical. Bill, question for you. How do you assess what impact a transaction will have on the interests of stakeholders, like employees, partners, the community, et cetera? You go through your process.
So, we work with our clients up front, and we take this tool that's sort of a generalist spreadsheet and sort of customize it for a client, and essentially figure out what's really important in this company. And if it's a merger, then that's complicated and it has many facets to it. If it's a private investment, then you probably don't care too much about many of the elements of culture because they're not going to be interfacing with you every day. So what we've done is we've taken this, we've taken the sort of theoretical framework of culture assessment, and we've said, how do we get this done in a compressed time frame of a corporate transaction? And we've sort of boiled it down into training our clients' team, the people who will be around the table, meeting with the buyers, meeting with the investors, and we map out what are some of the critical things we want to know about these people. And we create a scorecard, and you'll see some examples, perhaps, or examples of how we then score this. And the team then develops these open-ended questions that are geared at getting to the answers they want. Because you can't say, do you beat your wife? Because most people say no. So, you know, you might say, how many times have you been in cars? I don't know, that's a bad example. But, and then everybody, you know, ourselves and everyone on the team scores every buyer in this sort of grid. And these, you know, this whole thing is not a well-oiled science. I mean, I think we unfortunately, I think we're the only investment bank in the world that does this. We hope someday that won't be the case. And so we're figuring this out as we go along. But it gives the team perspective. Okay, this is what we thought was important, and now we have this sort of scorecard, and we average it out, we make it blind so nobody knows who answered what. And it gives a perspective. Now, you know, the financial terms are important, but then this is sort of, okay, this is the touchstone, these are things that are important. And then the most important thing is to do what Gavin did, because these people who are buying companies are very smart, and it doesn't take them long to figure out what you want. And they are happy to tell you what you want. It may not be what they really believe. So you have to go talk to as many of the former buyers, talk to employees. That if you do that, you don't need any of the rest.
And so what arguments are persuasive with the founder to kind of put the interests of stakeholders potentially either above or equal to his or hers?
Well, that gets to their values, right? For some people, they won't. I mean, some people, it's all about the money. But, you know, we only work with impact or conscious companies, and that's our market. So that's a starting point. In fact, most people from the investment community would look at our website and wonder what the hell we're doing.
And you're able to assess that prior to engaging with
Yes,
a client.
they won't. Yeah, they probably won't call us unless those things are important.
Self-filtering.
Yes, it is. Yes. Of course, we argue that these things actually enhance the value. We have no quantitative proof of this, other than, you know, Raj Sisodia's work, but that's fuzzy. But if you think about it, I think we have an argument that says this is part of the brand, and this is why the company's successful. And you know, when you dig into conscious capitalism, a higher purpose is what unites people. There's lots of research that says it's a very small percentage of people in this world that are motivated by money. Now, a lot of them live in Manhattan, but you know, most people want to be a part of something bigger, and so this higher purpose is a glue that holds people together. So when you dig into these companies, they have higher employee engagement scores significantly, and as a result, you know, employees execute at a higher level, so they have higher customer satisfaction scores. So it becomes a virtuous circle, and unfortunately, where it falls apart is, you know, you can look at any one element and you say, gee, we could save a lot of money if we cut that. And so that's where it, you know, that's where it becomes difficult.
You know, I think there's a lot of statistical data that would say companies that focus on things other than simply profit actually do better.
Right.
Right? Are more profitable. So I've got two last questions I'm going to ask each one of you, and then we'll open up to the floor so everybody has any questions. So just quickly down the line, Jay, I'll start with you first. What do you feel is the biggest risk factor to an M&A transaction failing to live up to its expectations?
Transaction itself. So I think I touched on it, you know, which was this idea of melding culture together, and I think that you know, there's certainly situations, you know, we've seen it where most deals are driven by money, and in a lot of cases on the, you know, on the sort of founder-seller side, there's, you know, perhaps a desire to see that the future is going to be something that they started, it's going to survive, but ultimately there's also, you know, that part of, because we've run into it multiple times, where the seller is really interested in, you know, retirement, and so there's a, you know, there's something to be said for, you know, coming to the right value proposition or the right value conclusion in a transaction. But I'd still say culture.
Culture. Gavin?
Yeah, getting the right fit, and getting the right culture is really really the critical thing. This whole piece. So.
Okay.
There's 30 years of research that says 70 to 90% of transactions fail to meet their financial objectives. And the number one reason is failed integration. And the number one reason integration fails is cultural incongruity. So McKinsey, BCG, Price Waterhouse, Deloitte, and loads of other people have been writing about this for 30 years. We just don't do anything differently.
So I'll come back to this one. Let's keep the microphone. And so last question before we open up to the floor. Having gone through the process, what advice would you give to someone considering a conscious exit of their business?
Know what is important, make those inviolable, build arguments around why they should be important to the buyer, and then do everything Gavin.
Yeah, because that's exactly what I say. Take the time to go visit, talk to employees at the company if they've bought other companies in the past. Go, talk to some of their, former owners. How did it go? How do you feel about it? Things like that. The guy Tom, who's their acquisition guy who worked with me, he took me out to California and introduced me to people and left me alone with them. So he was pretty confident that, he had a good thing going and that everybody was going to tell me good stuff, which they all did. So that, really, like you said, they all know what I want, right? They know I'm the culture guy and want to know, if this culture is going to be a good fit or not. And he had the guts to just leave me alone with these people and let me talk to them, so.
All right, Jay?
I'd say something similar, which is, and I think it kind of cuts across again on both sides of the M&A transaction, but ultimately it comes down to the lowest common denominator, which is ultimately the people. And you can make decisions in the boardroom, and most of the time, a lot of those decisions are going to be financially oriented. But you get out amongst people who are actually doing the work. We're lucky in our case because we've got researchers and scientists and people that chose a profession because they were passionate about that profession. And so when we think about transactions and bringing companies in our space together, it's somewhat easier to just kind of look and know that at that people level, that they care about what they're doing, they care about the customer, and ultimately in our business, we care about patients, and we care about patients with cancer, and we care about finding solutions. So we get a little extra.
Yep. That's great. Are there any questions from the audience? Any hands? Yes, you got the hand up first.
So whether you own a company, when you're looking at exit, or you are involved in a company that's looking for a buyer or itself to exit, how do you really help that company on the selling side understand what they don't understand? What I'm getting at is, the concept of conscious capitalism, while the book has been around, and Whole Foods is a tremendous example, and the movement that this represents is awesome. There are a lot of companies that are out there that are doing what they think is just the right thing, but they don't necessarily have a method, and the box is all checked. So to what extent do you actually help them to assess or understand whether or not they actually fit the mold, or what they may need to do and adjust before they're ready to make that move, so that they can have a real handshake, as you put it, the integration that works?
I just say that's actually pretty easy, because conscious capitalism has given a vocabulary to things that family-held businesses have done for centuries, right? If you're in a small town in upstate New York, you may be the largest employer, you're probably on the school board, your best friends, your kids are best friends with your maintenance people. You think about things. Your ecosystem, you get it. So for those companies, it's really just about saying, look, here's some fancy terms, but you know, and we can help you kind of maybe state those so that you get the result you want.
You have a question here?
I'm curious what you guys think with regards to the essence of culture as the silver lining that you're setting as the foundation, representing why M&A is successful. Why isn't that the case in having so much precedent with this impact in other industries? I was just reading about how, for instance, Disney is starting to go through the pain of the assets that they bought from Murdoch and Fox for this very reason. It's not as if when you talk about, you know, the lawyers and the investment bankers that all this due diligence doesn't take place when this happens over and over and over again. What is it that's being missed? Is it simply that they don't care because they simply want to make money, or are there other things involved that you guys look at? That makes
I
you
just want
successful?
to jump in. How many in the room do culture work? Okay, how many of you have been at the table in an acquisition? Really? That's amazing. So well, you just blew my whole presentation.
Gavin, you want to answer that one, Gavin?
I was just gonna say, deals are driven by lawyers, accountants, tax people, you know, none of the bankers, none of those people have any training, background, understanding. They're not stupid. It's just, you know, it's like you don't judge your 6-year-old because they don't understand calculus. Well, they're still working on it. So no one at the table, other than apparently a dozen of you, which is a first, really, you know, has a lens, has a vision, has understanding.
Yeah, so, I'll put forth an idea. You know, we all talk about culture and things like that, and companies having different cultures and that kind of thing. I think that there actually is an ideal culture system for all human organizations, because it's all hardwired into our brains. I don't know how many of you, have anybody read the 2 books that came out recently, both of them called Blueprint? So there are 2 books called Blueprint. One's by Robert Plomin, the other one's by Nicholas Christakis. Plomin's a researcher in England, and Christakis is a Yale professor. Christakis' book called Blueprint is about the 99% of our genes that makes us human beings, that makes us the same. We all vibrate on the same frequencies, we all do, you know, certain things, we all need certain stuff, right? That's all that 99% of our genes is hardwired in. Evolution didn't stop at the neck. You know, it's all in here, okay? There's a lot of stuff that we're pre-wired to be. And Plomin's book is about the 1% of our genes, which makes us all unique individuals. And how much of that is pre-wired in. So you can actually take genetic information from somebody before they're even born, and to a large extent you can predict now what their personality will be like. Nature has a little, you know, nurture has a little bit to do with it, but nature has a much bigger impact than we think. It's huge. So, you know, that being the case, that, you know, nature has a huge part on how we, you know, how we're wired, we're pre-wired to work and everything. We can set up structures and systems based on how we're designed to be. And we were not designed to be, you know, living in an environment like this. You know, this is the last, you know, if our human evolution was an hour, the last 3 minutes our human civilization. That whole first 57 minutes, that whole first 57 minutes was when all the wiring got done. And what were we doing? We were wandering around African savannas, you know, with tribal groups of people, small family groups and things like that. That's what we're wired for. And all of our, so you think about, so let me just throw a thing that I find just amazing. Like, if, has anybody read the Dalai Lama's book, the Book of Joy? So, okay, good. So the Dalai Lama says that there's 8 pillars of happiness. Perspective, let's see if I can get them all. Perspective, acceptance, humility, humor, forgiveness, compassion, gratitude, and generosity. Now, if you think about those things, Can you imagine any humans? So these are the things that are the pillars of joy, right? These are the things that make people happy. That are the root, according to the Dalai Lama. And there's another set of things that you can look at the field of positive psychology. There's a lot of overlap. But if you look at those things, those are the things that make us happy. Those are exactly the same things that make our human groups work, right? Can you imagine a human group working for any length of time without forgiveness, without compassion, without generosity? It's humility, humor. Can you imagine? It wouldn't happen. It's not possible. We would fall apart, right? So the very same things that make us actually work really well together are hardwired into us, and we actually feel happy. Our brains, make us feel happy. If Martin Seligman is the founder of positive psychology movement, and so he talks about it's called PERMA, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, achievement, purpose and achievement. So those are the things that he says are important for human flourishing and for human happiness. Those same things. So if I learn a new thing, why should that make me happy? If I develop a relationship with Bill, why should that make me happy? Well, it's because, evolution said that, look, the groups that succeed are the ones that develop relationships, that develop trust with each other, that learn new things, that share that knowledge. Those are the groups that succeeded. The ones that didn't do that, they're gone. Those people who were loners, who didn't hang out with the rest of the group and contribute their strengths. And by the way, we're all totally different. Each one of us, all that uniquenesses and everything, we all need those. I have certain strengths, whatever. Bill has different strengths. JP has other strengths and things. And if I try to go it alone, I'm going to totally screw up. If everybody was a clone of me, we'd make the same mistake over and over and over and over. It's nuts, right? But you put us all together, with all those different personalities and everything, it makes a huge difference. So we're really wired to from a cultural point of view, there is really good cultural systems. So when it fails, it's because somebody's going for something else other than what we're all wired for, which is, cooperation, collaboration, humility, humor, generosity, compassion, all those things.
So it's getting people and resources to work along a common purpose, going the same direction, becomes more effective in doing that collectively.
Yeah, and if you think about the principles of conscious capitalism, what conscious capitalism is all about, it's totally aligned with all the things in the Book of Joy, positive psychology, all this stuff. It's all the same thing. That's why it works. So,
I've got a question. How do you think we change this attitude and perspective towards culture within an M&A scenarios? And I struggle with how do you get both sides of that equation to understand it. And it seems like you can either come at it from the founder's side, where if you have an enlightened founder and they want to preserve the relationship they have with their stakeholders, right, in the community in upstate New York, whatever it is, that will drive a certain set of behaviors, right? You'll go through this kind of a process to look at who the buyers are and where are they gonna share kind of what I'm all about. But how do you do it on the other side from the buyer's perspective to make sure that the company we're acquiring isn't gonna poison the well, so to speak? And how do you execute this kind of a thing when you're trying to go into a founder-led company and acquire it? And maybe that founder isn't, culture savvy, but you need to understand it without tipping off that the whole, which direction you come at it from, where are we going to have more success, and how do you do that without, how do you facilitate that without tipping it off, I guess?
Well, I guess it starts with, there has to be motivation by the person who's going to drive it, right? So if it's you and you're part of that transaction and you think and feel that way, then you get to drive it. Doesn't mean that you're going to be successful with it, but if you really think about it, I think Bill had said this, deals are being done by lawyers and bankers, and the reality is it's about business owners and founders and people ultimately that are making transactions successful, and it means more people need to come together as groups like this, and we need to talk about it as business people, as I'm sure people in this room are lawyers and bankers and transaction people, and we need to be thinking about it.
one question up here. He's been waiting patiently. I'll come back here. Go ahead.
Not patiently,
You've been waiting.
I'm nuts. Bill, I had a question for you based on something that you had remarked on earlier. You said about your own institution that you have an argument for why this kind of investing makes sense. So I suppose my question is something like, why do you suppose that? And then you also said, we basically have no peers. Everyone thinks we're crazy or nuts, whatever. So the question is, why does your argument fail to persuade?
Well, I think we all have biases. You know, there are certain belief systems that aren't logical, that are simply deeply held. Most of us who took an economics course were trained that, you know, we're economic animals, that we make decisions based on price. You know, there's not value. So I don't know. And maybe I'm a really bad salesman, but to answer your, like, I don't know how to do it. Like, we have failed. The Conscious Capitalism chapter that we helped start, you know, we initially said we're gonna evangelize. We are gonna take this to the CEOs, and we're gonna show the logic, and, you know, our success rate was really bad. So, I don't know. I have come to the sort of jaundiced opinion that Einstein was right. Sometimes change comes one funeral at a time.
I mean, we've sort of taken the theme here on mergers and acquisitions. And how would you reconcile sort of, let's say lower market, middle market transactions, kind of like what we're talking about, say, New York guys. How do you reconcile that as you get into these multinational sort of conglomerate transactions? Similarly, we all know that Disney bought Fox, but not for Fox's culture, right? They bought it for the library, right? And all that kind of stuff. So you got a point there where the ultimate business aim was not doing it. There is no consciousness. There's only capitalism. So is the ultimate goal of the conversation like somehow bridging that divide, or are there periods where conscious capitalism can be effective and there's just other transactions or trades that can't?
I have a thought. So part of it, you know, in my opinion, would be that it comes from diversity at the board level, because ultimately boards are going to drive a lot of the kind of sort of behavior that's going to take place down inside of large organizations. And one of the unfortunate things, and I've experienced this in many of my companies that I've been involved in, we don't have a diverse board, and you know, which is unfortunate. I was very lucky recently. I had spent a number of years on the board of directors for the Drug Information Association, so focused on regulatory around big pharma, et cetera. But it was a fairly small organization. But the point of it was that we had brought in a new CEO and a woman who was very passionate about the work that she did, but she was also very passionate about building a board around her of people that could, you know, help us to think differently as a group and as a board. And one of her number one priorities, when we brought her in 4 years ago, was she wanted to have 50-50 men and women, and we, of course, have diversity also centered around, you know, looking across the world because it was a global board. And as we put that together, and it took us roughly 4 years to do it. And I will tell you that the effectiveness of that board today compared to the effectiveness of that board when I first joined it, which was about probably 20% women and 80% male, is amazingly.
Can I? You can't see this, but Reed was so disappointed with my answer. I have to try again. I think part of it too is we are really linear thinkers in this generation. Most of us think, you know, A, then B. And business is a network, right? And it's complicated. And if you move A, it may move B, but it probably moves D, E, C, all of which come around and move B back again. So, and that's really hard for people who are trained with spreadsheets, right? Because you can build algebraic formulas that move things. But, you know, not many of us know how to do linear programming, which takes complexity into consideration. And so I think part of it is just this, it's so hard for us to understand that there are these effects that are unseen. You have to intuit that.
Meh.
Still not satisfied. You can't please everybody sometimes. One last question.
Professor.
Were you pointing at me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, so I don't know why it's hard, but it is hard. You're right. And by the way, thank you, because all of you are so incredibly interesting. And the focus on culture, I think, is right. But what I find in my operational head is that there's change. Somebody mentioned change. And, you know, everybody that's working on this transaction is at a level in the company that gets to have these conversations. But what I think they sometimes forget is that the change is going to affect all the people that work with them. And so operationalizing the leadership that it takes to move it in the direction that you all agree is the right direction to go, I think that's where the really hard work is. So like, have you seen that like take years? You know, because I asked the same question that Reed does, like, why did so many fail, or maybe it was this gentleman here. Why do so many fail at that and not succeed at it even when the intentions are right?
I'm just going to tell one little story. So there's a standard document called a letter of intent, which they have they're all the same essentially. And we have this thing called Exhibit A, right, where we put all of the soft, fuzzy stuff into it, and all of our sort of demands, understandings. We codify the company's core values, mission, whatever is appropriate for that deal. And we had a client, relatively small, kind of young development company, 23 patents, a lot of value, but not, it's early in its life. It was being acquired by a large private equity firm that was represented by the 9th largest law firm in the world. And they saw our letter of intent and they laughed at us. They laughed at us and they said, nobody does this, right? Nobody does this. We do, 10 deals a day. Nobody does this because it's precedent. The whole, and yet the management of the company got it and they said, no, we're okay with that. So there's this institutional knowledge that this is the way things are done. And if you're around the deal table and you're not one of the lead lawyers or bankers or whatever, you really don't have a voice because they are the experts. And so now there's some companies that are changing that. Unilever, is doing some things different, and I'm sure there are some other really big companies. By the way, Wall Street occasionally is not happy with Unilever. So it's messy. And I think these really large companies, they are so controlled by the stock market, they have to produce returns. I think they're doomed. I don't know when that changes. Maybe
would you advocate that some level of corporate consciousness here would be that we got to do quarterly reporting? Do you think that could benefit?
There are people, the SEC just approved a new stock exchange called the long-term stock market. It isn't operating. In fact, they haven't yet published their listing requirements. But purportedly, one of the things is no guidance, and they're going to allow sort of majority voting for different classes. It's done anyways. So, and their plan is to do IPOs co-listed with big exchanges. So they want to be on the team, set the rules. So I don't know, is that, I don't see one lever that we can all pull. Even if it were really hard, we could all get behind it. It has to be a lot of.
And they are hamstrung from doing a lot of different things because of the street's reaction. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Even if you want to do them, your board will, your board will feel the heat. So, I don't know.
And I guess I could, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, if the book that was written that brought about conscious capitalism on the rally, wake the hell up. Okay, so that's out there. you were pointing out that, you know, you went out the door, put the body, I'm assuming, put the body of data together, and went around to organizations and literally looked it over their head and said, there's data, there's numbers, and they say that a company that practices and operates in a conscious capitalist manner gets a premium, or is a successful organization over others that don't. Parallel that back to sustainability, forgive me for using the generic term, but sustainability where, you know, companies are operating in a healthier way, materials, environment, people, etc. And you have sustainability indexes that got created, and you have them now becoming, or I should say, they became standard parts of annual reports. Companies were actually graded, their, you know, ETFs, all kinds of stuff around that. Seems like that's the evolution, right? You're pointing to that. So, how do those of us who have that common belief, I guess you answered it before, it's a handshake, it's got to be on both sides of the table. I get that. So what's your opinion on how we accelerate the adoption, engagement, and embracing?
Well, let me answer that, and I'll do this in kind of a closing remark. And I think to put this whole conversation in context and the opportunity we all have in this whole movement of conscious capitalism has, is that there are over 12 million companies privately held in the United States that control over $10 trillion in assets, that they estimate 70% of which will change hands in the next 15 to 20 years as baby boomers retire and sell their business. And if you look at the survey data, and they've done this, over half of them would say they'll only sell their business if they believe it will not cause significant operational disruption to the business, including the operations, the people, the culture, their community. And so I think the opportunity we have is that's all going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. If this idea of conscious capitalisms and the 4 tenets that we have of conscious capitalisms, we can employ that in those, you know, 12 million companies and all of those transactions, we have an opportunity to make significant improvement to those businesses.